We should be recording now. Hello, my name is Orsini, and today I'm going to be talking about how effective mentoring facilitates doctoral student leadership development. As a person who's worked in graduate education as a staff mentor for many years and is currently a graduate student now and has been in graduate student leadership positions, this topic is super interesting to me. Really sad that I can't be there in person to have these discussions with you regarding this topic, but I'll do my best to keep this presentation interesting and not take too long. I'm going to start by briefly reviewing expectations of doctoral education, effective mentoring, and leadership self-advocacy. I'll then spend just a couple of minutes discussing our research objectives and project design for spending what I hope to be the bulk of our time, talk about the findings and the areas for future research. There are two assumptions about how Western doctoral education is organized. The first is that the purpose is to prepare novice scholars to conduct sound research, and the second is that the primary model of training is cognitive apprenticeship. So cognitive apprenticeship involves a type of instruction where not only the tangible activity is made visible, but also the process of thinking is made visible. So doctoral students must be provided with the opportunity to develop strong analytical and synthesis skills through this cognitive apprenticeship. And the general expectation then is that they will be able to generate new knowledge, come up with new ideas, and use ideas and knowledge to transform understanding by communicating this information to others and applying it in real life. Now, this is a very difficult process to navigate, especially as doctoral students are given progressive independence and increasing responsibility in their cognitive apprenticeships. The last assumption, of course, is that faculty will serve as the primary structure that prepares doctoral students for professional life through these cognitive apprenticeships. Okay, so I could spend the whole 20 minutes talking about mentoring theory. However, for the purposes of this presentation, I want to give you just an operational definition and then discuss the continuum of mentoring relationships. So the definition we used in this study is a personal and reciprocal relationship in which a more experienced faculty member acts as a guide, role model, teacher, and sponsor of a less experienced student. Mentor provides the mentee with knowledge, advice, counsel, challenge, and support, and the mentee's pursuit of becoming a full member of a particular profession. Okay, so mentoring should not be necessarily defined by a formal role assignment either, but rather people should look at the quality of the relationship in terms of specific functions provided by the mentor. So the mentoring relationship continuum depicted here is a model that makes this easy to visualize. The MRC proposes that all developmental relationships can be placed on a continuum and can be defined by the degree of engagement and the deliberate fulfillment of specific mentoring functions or behaviors. As relationships move along the continuum, it becomes more active and reciprocal. Mentors provide more career and psychosocial support and become more intentional in promoting professional development and success of their mentees. We won't go into any more detail at this point, but the general expectation in doctoral education, as we mentioned before, that because of the nature of cognitive apprenticeship and the general lack of formal development process in graduate school, faculty are expected to be relational mentors, which you can see at the bottom right of the model. Relational mentoring involves higher levels of collaboration, reciprocation, interdependence, and a strong working alliance, which includes rapport, apprenticeship, and identification. And it should also be ideally inspirational, motivational, and transformative. The slanted lines represent growth-fostering interactions here in this model. Growth-fostering interactions are characterized by mutual empathy, authenticity, and empowerment. And there should be more of those as you move across the model. Okay. So within this context of relational mentoring and doctoral education, there are several other factors to consider that are important to leadership development in doctoral students. First, the imposter phenomenon is something that must be considered. So imposter phenomenon occurs when individuals perceive insufficient support from influential others and is exemplified by the tendency to feel inadequate despite repeated success and is common in graduate programs. IP, otherwise known as the imposter syndrome, and I have the model included here in the PowerPoint, can significantly reduce feelings of self-efficacy by increasing emotional arousal like anxiety and nullifying verbal persuasion. Leadership self-efficacy can be conceptualized as one's self-perception of personal capability to perform cognitive and behavioral actions required to facilitate group processes. So if students don't feel confident in their ability to conduct or discuss research because they feel like they're fake, because of the imposter phenomenon, they are less likely to engage with peers and faculty, and research has found that this problem can persist into their professional careers. For example, faculty who have imposter phenomenon are more likely to teach via lecture than discussion-based because they don't want to be found out. It is also important to remember that graduate school typically lacks formal leadership development structures to resolve imposter syndrome and its impact on self-efficacy, so the mentor-mentee relationship becomes even more important. In this context, mentors must not only provide students with relevant career and academic skills, but they also must teach students to navigate the social cultural rules of their profession and give them challenging experiences where they can test out what they have learned in their cognitive apprenticeship. So knowing that, we were interested in understanding how mentoring behaviors interacted with Bandura's self-efficacy precursors like mastery experiences, and also with the leadership environment to impact doctoral student leadership development. The Coers model of leadership development provides a depiction of how these forces align to impact leader self-efficacy and leadership development. Our belief was that students scoring a faculty mentoring competency would have a strong relationship with the type and quality of experiences they had access to that might influence leader self-efficacy. In effect, you could not have bad mentoring and high leader self-efficacy unless there are some environmental factors that could contribute to leadership development outside of the primary mentoring relationship. So our objectives then were to identify what faculty mentoring behaviors are perceived by doctoral students as effective and ineffective, to determine how doctoral student perceptions of mentoring behavior impacts leadership self-efficacy, and to determine how leadership environments impact doctoral student perceptions of faculty mentoring behavior and also the development of their leadership self-efficacy. So the population we sampled for the study included students associated with graduate student leadership organizations at the university, specifically something called the Graduate Student Council. This organization has a fluctuating membership of about 200 students. And these students participate in general body meetings once a month and are, help spread information to all the departments and help review travel grants and things like that. Calls for volunteers were made at organization or general body meetings and on our website. 16 students participated in an approximately 1 hour semi-structured interview. I say 1 hour, some of these interviews were 40 minutes, some of them were 2 hours. It really just depended on how much the students wanted to talk. The tool we used was, after the interview, they completed a quantitative survey measuring their faculty's mentoring skill. The tool we used was the Mentoring Competency Assessment, which is a measurement that has been used previously in academic research settings and which contains 26 items measuring 6 functional competency areas. So the table here lists the average scores by participant on the Mentoring Competency Assessment. The 16 participants included 14 women and 2 men. This was a significant departure from the demographics of the leadership group, which is about 57% women. This lines up with previous research, however, that mentoring relationships in academia are more significant for women than for male peers. So you can see only 2 men, right? So the Mentee version of the MCA uses a 7-point Likert scale in which 1 equals not at all skilled, 4 equals moderately skilled, and 7 equals extremely skilled. And these competencies included maintaining effective communication, aligning expectations, assessing understanding, fostering independence, addressing diversity, and promoting professional development. And you can see we included a final column overall where they had their overall rating based on all 26 items. So you can see in this table that the overall scores of all 26 items showed a slightly negative skewed distribution, with more scores above and below 4. This has been a common distribution of mentoring scores that I have seen in my time utilizing this measure. Generally, more people are satisfied with mentoring received than they are dissatisfied, which is a good thing. We were satisfied, however, that we had volunteers that had experienced a full range of mentoring activities just based on these scores. We use these scores to put our review of the interview transcripts in context then. So essentially anyone that scored above a 4, we felt was satisfied with their mentoring, and people that were below a 4 or below were dissatisfied, slightly dissatisfied or really dissatisfied. So given that, we really wanted to see what behaviors were associated with positive and negative mentoring scores. So from this analysis, we found what we perceive to be a sequence of mentoring behaviors that leads to the development of leadership self-efficacy. If any functional competency in the sequence is not practiced effectively by the mentor, all future actions tied to mentoring competency are disrupted. So we will explain this more as we discuss each competency and how it relates to leadership self-efficacy individually. The sequence starts with effective communication, which allows for the correct alignment of expectations, which facilitates greater understanding between the faculty and student, which allows faculty to create experiences that build confidence, independence, and that provides opportunities for relevant professional development opportunities. This process ends with students having much greater confidence, lower emotional arousal, and greater leadership self-efficacy. Okay. So the clearest finding in the study was that maintaining effective communication was the single most important mentoring competency to students as it relates to perceptions of effective mentoring. Without it, there was almost no chance for students to develop leadership self-efficacy. More specifically, the single most important characteristic was access to the faculty mentor. And this was often seen, the examples that we saw were regular face-to-face or virtual meetings with periods of email correspondence in between. More opportunities for communication leads to greater understanding between people and allowed for more access to relevant mastery and vicarious experiences, specifically in research where students must feel confident in graduate school in order to engage in most types of group processes that involve leadership. Without that confidence, imposter syndrome can impact their desire to interact with others. And students who didn't have access to regular meetings were far more stressed and anxious and far more likely to feel overwhelmed, unsupported, and unsatisfied. These people were also far less likely to feel good about their research ability and far less likely to engage in leadership behaviors. Okay, so you can see a quote here. We meet once a week and we do a little email here and there. Every week we meet at 4:30 at a local brewery, lucky student. It's really nice. We'll discuss where I'm at. Here's what I'm doing. So you're just kind of tracking it in the loop. And again, it's all good communication and transparency. I think we'd be friends outside of this as well. So important to note here that just because they say the part about friendship, that's not actually important. The most important part of this, what's important is that the student feels like they have regular access to their faculty advisor. Some students actually don't want that friendship component, but they absolutely want everything else that the student has, which is the regular access, the regular meetings, and feeling like they have good, open, and transparent communication. And we saw this over and over. The next step in the process is aligning expectations. This was only possible for students who reported regular meetings with faculty, but not guaranteed just because they had regular meetings. So the big issue students discuss as relates to this topic is the desire for faculty engagement in their research, specifically in the training, planning, and strategy. It's like if they're going to build this long railroad track, which is why this picture here, you know, if you're going to build a railroad track a long distance, any deviation from like the correct line is going to could take you hundreds of miles away from your final destination. So even if when things in graduate school get hard, even when they feel like, as long as they feel like they're moving in the right direction, even if it's slow, they have reduced anxiety, more access to relevant mastery experiences, and more vicarious experiences because they feel more comfortable getting involved, both with other students and with what their faculty members doing. So just a little quote here. He has done pretty well with communication. He wrote me an essay response saying, here's what I think my responsibilities are as your advisor. So we sort of spelled out in writing our responsibilities. It was a very good exercise for both of us, I think. The cool example from the student is that she was actually thinking about changing advisors because she didn't feel like there was alignment or engagement on her research topic. And as soon as they had like this sort of come to Jesus moment, it improved the entire relationship. So setting these expectations is really important. Okay, so the next step is understanding. So it's so important for faculty to be able to understand their students for building self-efficacy, but it does require a lot of communication, and you absolutely have to align expectations first. Typically what we saw is that poor assessment of student interests led to like a lot of anxiety. And that's really what we're talking about, understanding what students want to do, what they want to do with their career, what research they're interested in, okay? And a good example of a missed opportunity for mastery experiences, there was a student who wanted to participate, just wanted to give some lectures in a class that her faculty member was teaching. The faculty member just never gave her the opportunity, despite the fact that she asked. When she complained at the end and said, hey, listen, you knew this was my favorite stuff, why didn't you let me lecture on it? The faculty member who had been working with the student for 5 years said, I had no idea that this was your favorite stuff. So that's sort of like a big gap in understanding. When you've been working with someone for so long, you should absolutely understand what their interests are. And if you don't, it's hard to give them the correct experiences that they need to gain confidence. This also means, so what this lack of understanding also we saw led to fewer interactions between the faculty member because the student was no longer interested in interacting. And so that reduced opportunities for positive verbal persuasion. So I think personally, he's a good person, a really good person. He's a good advisor in terms of science, but he's not a good advisor in terms of meeting student goals based on their limitations. This was a student that even though they scored their advisor pretty high in their mentoring competencies, this one issue, a lack of understanding of her abilities, was leading her to want to change advisors. So this lack of understanding is hugely important, and without it, people don't feel like they can go off on their own. Okay. So independence. So fostering independence, really highly correlated to maintaining effective communication, the strongest correlation in the study. Essentially, you know, if you don't, and the reason why we think this is because what we saw is that students that had strong communication with their advisor were able to align their expectations and then have understanding, were able to have access to more mastery experiences. Okay, and they were also, because they were involved in more mastery experiences, they actually had access to more verbal persuasion, which boosted their confidence. Now, the important thing to say about, you know, providing these these opportunities to students to be independent, it really only helps if the faculty provide the correct amount of support. So it's regular meeting and access for questions. If you don't have that amount, the proper amount of support, when you progressively give students more independence, they might not be able to persist in the face of these challenges. And then again, students also won't persist in the face of challenges if they don't feel like the experience is relevant to them. They won't even want to participate. So it's not only important for the faculty members to keep up with this and to see what they're doing by providing support, but it's also important for them to understand what the students' interests are so that the experience they give them are relevant. I'm not going to read this entire long quote, but I think that, so if you're reading through this, the gist of this is that a student had this opportunity for a big, independent experience, and she got to see her faculty advisor stand up for her, make sure she was going to be the first author on this work. And not only did this make her feel more confident in engaging independent behavior in the future, but it made her think like, okay, I can do this in my own way moving forward. So just really important for the faculty to be there from a supporting place when you're actually fostering this independence. You can't just let them run around wild, or that self-efficacy won't develop. Okay, so the last step then is professional development. So having a mentor that acts as a motivated, passionate role model is just really important. So it's not just that you provide guidance on work-life balance, which is really important, especially that proactive word, but you actually have to serve as a role model when it comes to work-life balance. Faculty that could not manage their time well and had poor work-life balance, that really hurt the relationship between the advisor and the mentee, and it made, it reduced their ability to provide professional development. Because students weren't necessarily confident in their ability to do so. Faculty that are motivated and a good role model also typically are more collaborative and provide more socialization. not only in research, but by meeting other people. And that is really, really important for these students to develop their leadership self-efficacy because they're more involved, interacting more. And so students who see motivated mentors providing them with collaborative experiences, they reported higher levels of confidence. They were better with independence. They felt better about being understood. And they all said that even though, yes, graduate school is stressful no matter what, it's much more manageable when you're at this level of development with your advisor and you're getting all of these things. So, this person said, such a good role model. When we talk about research, you can tell he cares about what we're doing. Sometimes in our meetings, we're just talking about science and different ideas. When you lose track of time because you enjoy something so much, it's called flow. And I feel like those are those moments where ideas are flowing. So this is someone that really enjoys having these conversations. So this is where you can see from the cognitive apprenticeship, they're seeing how people are thinking, and that is helping them develop leadership self-efficacy in the context of being a discipline expert. Okay, so I think it's really important now to talk about the impact of dysfunctional leadership environments. Essentially, what you're going to have when you have these dysfunctional leadership environments, which can, the type of dysfunctions in these environments can differ wildly. But what we saw consistently from students and what they defined as dysfunctional environments was that they had a much higher reliance on their mentor because there was a lack of formal structures in the department to help them through the graduate school process. So the problem is this amplifies problems with less effective mentoring. So if you have less effective mentoring in these environments, students are much more upset about it. So it's more important to have good mentoring in these environments. So there's typically a lot more administrative confusion, so students have higher emotional arousal, which is why they need the mentor more. There's fewer student interactions typically because people seem to hunker down in these environments, so you have less verbal persuasion and vicarious experiences. There's reduced collaboration and socialization pretty much at all levels. So again, you have less access to vicarious and mastery experiences. And generally you just have fewer leadership opportunities because there's just reduced interactions in these departments. So here's one that really resonated with me. This quote, basically the students saw two department chairs that were interviewing for a leadership position. And they were both making jokes about don't hire me. And everyone was laughing. It was so flippant. And she talked a lot at length about how like the leadership in this department, the student and the faculty not being interested in leadership and how they treated students just made the environment horrible for everyone. And, what's interesting is having, I talked to a number of different people from the same department, and the biggest difference between managing this environment was having a good mentor. And in this case, the student just did not have the support from the mentor to move through it, and the stress was incredible. Okay, so requirements for PhD student leadership development based on our findings here. Number one, students must have regular access to support from the mentors. That's most important. Two, students must serve as mentors must serve as proactive, motivated role models. Mentors must provide students with relevant experiences that build confidence in their research abilities. This is hugely important for the imposter phenomenon. And four, students cannot feel overwhelmed. Even if you have the other three, if the student's feeling overwhelmed, it's very difficult for them to develop leadership self-efficacy just because they only have so much to give. We saw many students that were a little bit involved, but they were just so stressed out because they didn't feel like they quite had the support they needed, that they just weren't as involved as they otherwise could have been. I think it's important to note that these criteria are way more difficult to satisfy in a tough leadership environment. And especially in tough leadership environments, having multiple mentors is beneficial, but it's just hard to find. Typically what you'll find is people have multiple mentors in leadership environments that are not dysfunctional, that are strong. So it's just one additional advantage for development of leadership self-efficacy. Another interesting thing is previous leadership experiences before graduate school impact the level of emotional arousal. And so students can actually manage leadership self-efficacy in cases where they come in with pre-existing knowledge. So I have one student that had a certain set of research skills that they had learned as an undergraduate student, and they had great experiences with graduate students mentoring them when they were an undergraduate student. So despite the fact that they had a horrible relationship with their faculty advisor and existed in a dysfunctional leadership environment, they still provided limited leadership experiences to undergraduate students within the context of this one set of information that they knew really well. So just something to consider that the experiences that people come in do play a role in this as well. So, okay, areas for future research. It's really important for us to do some longitudinal studies and with repeated measures, because one of the things we found is that people's perceptions of mentoring, effective mentoring, changed drastically. In fact, we had one student that said if I had interviewed them the day before, they would have had much different responses had I not, because of one meeting that they had with their advisor that changed their opinion on their ability to graduate from 20% to 80% chance of graduation. So one meeting made them feel 4 times more likely to graduate. So we really need to see over time and with repeated measures how mentoring behaviors impact students' self-efficacy. Mentoring is an overused and often misunderstood term. By priming students and saying we're talking about mentoring, it really, I think, changes the entire dynamic of the interview process. So I think studies should be conducted asking questions about effective faculty interactions, without us specifically identifying mentoring, maybe even come at it from a teamwork perspective. The impact of faculty mentoring years after graduate school, we don't understand like over the long term how these behaviors are impacting leadership self-efficacy and how that impacts faculty behavior later on, or even in private sector. I think it's really important for us to look at that. I think the connection would be most interesting looking at it in the academic sector, but I think we should look at both. And then I think we have to look at what impact mentoring has on doctoral-student leadership self-efficacy, in the sense that, like, okay, so we had one student in this interview that had really great mentoring and what actually was also served as a member on our executive board of the Graduate Student Council. So this person, though, what if they had really, really weak mentoring? Would they still have had the energy to pursue that position? So what is the difference, like what is the net difference on a student between having ineffective mentoring and really effective mentoring? Like what's the net effect on their leadership self-efficacy? I think that would be important to investigate. With that, I'd just like to say thank you. This is a topic I think that is really important. Every time, anecdotally, I talk to people about mentoring, it's just these conversations are so powerful, whether you're talking to current students, former students, or current faculty. So if anybody has any questions or they discuss this further or have any ideas for further research, I'd really appreciate it, because this is probably what I'm going to be doing for the rest of my professional life. So my email and my phone number is here, and I hope you appreciated the presentation. Thank you very much. Share.